Hi, so I'm going to read you from Palace Wagon Family, The True Story of the Donner Party. This book was written based on the journals that Virginia Reed kept and her writings about their trip. So this is the viewpoint of Virginia. There are several other versions of the story, which it's interesting to see different versions and see what different people said about the trip. So this is the version that was told by Virginia, and the author of this book, her name was Margaret Sutton and then Mary Stevens. They both took the journal and just kind of put it in different words, and also probably corrected Virginia's spelling because her spelling was atrocious. All right. Their home on wheels was left to be blown to pieces by the salt and sand. Only a few of the Reed's treasures, or of the children's treasures, were salvaged from the wreck. The Reed teamsters, all except Milt Elliott, joined the Donner brothers, who still had their wagons. Eliza grumbled and complained because she had the one wagon that the men had brought back was so small she could hardly move around in it. In the little black book, their camp was called Madwoman Camp because all the women were mad with anger. Yeah, you can imagine they're having such difficult trials. And I'm sure that walking across the salt flats in a long dress, in a long-sleeved long dress, was not, and trying to cook over a fire, and trying to get water and trying to find food made everybody angry and stressed out and tense. So it's funny that it was called Madwoman Camp. "We've waited long enough for the Reeds to find their cattle," the Graves girls complained. "Little good their china dishes will do them when we run out of food." The flour barrel in which the good china had been packed was loaded into the Breen wagon. Mrs. Breen was not thinking of saving the dishes so much as saving the flour. So when you rode in a covered wagon, covered wagons were super bumpy. They did not have shock absorbers or springs. If you rode in a wagon, it didn't have springs. But if you rode in a carriage, carriages usually had springs that the carriage sat on, so they were a little more bouncy. A wagon just felt every bump. So it was really hard riding in a wagon. And so, sorry, Eugene's crying for dinner. It's almost time. It's almost time. Not yet, though. So one way for belongings to get packed, they would take a big, huge barrel made out of wood, and they would fill the barrel with flour. And that's how you would store your dishes. So the flour would protect your dishes from getting broken when your wagon hit all the bumps or went over the mountains. And so they're saying that Mrs. Breen didn't really care about the dishes. She just wanted to have that barrel that was full of flour in her wagon, because she knew that if that was in her wagon, she would get some of the flour as payment for carrying the flour barrel in her wagon. The flour barrel in which the good china had been packed was loaded into the Breen wagon. Mrs. Breen was not thinking of saving the dishes so much as the flour. Every bit of food was loaded into the various wagons, but the Reeds soon learned they would have very little of it to eat. "You'll have to divide it with the company if you want us to carry it," they were told. Before traveling much farther, an inventory of provisions was taken, and it was found that there was not enough to last the emigrants through California. A call was made for volunteers to ride ahead and beg Captain Sutter for relief. "I'll go," spoke up little Charlie Stanton. Big Mac offered to go with him. Virginia couldn't help laughing as they rode away, the big man on a horse and the little one on a mule. "What a pair," she said to Patty. "I hope they don't like California so well that they stay there and forget about us." So that was probably a good plan, to send them ahead, because they know that they're probably not going to make it. They know that, number one, they don't have enough food to make it. And number two, the weather is starting to turn. So this was a year, I think it was 1846, and it was a really weird year in California. It was a year that had super early snowfall and a very high snowfall. And so, sometimes how we have rainstorms, we have years that are super rainy, and then we have years that there's no rain at all. We have years of drought in California. So this was a year when there was a lot of snowfall and probably a lot of rain in actual California, but a lot of snowfall up in the mountains, like a record snowfall. And unfortunately, if they would have come through in 1845 or 1844 or 1847, they might have had less snow. Let's see. We are on... What a pair, she said to Patty. I hope they don't like California so well that they stay there and forget about us. The weather was very puzzling. It had stormed during the night, and the tops of the hills were now white with snow. At home in Illinois, the Reed children had looked forward to the first snowfall. It seemed strange that everyone was dreading it. If anyone's to blame, it's Hastings for leading us off on the wrong road, and I guess I'm to blame for losing the cattle, Milt Elliott admitted. He had meant the words for Patty's ears, but John Snyder had heard them. Milt didn't like what he had to say about it later. Tempers flared quickly throughout the whole company. Parents screamed, and children were slapped without reason. It's because they're afraid, the puzzled Reed children were told. If it's snowing here, what will it be like in the California mountains? And what will we do if Stanton and Big Mac don't get back with the food? Pa can't go hunting? Asked Jimmy. Your father has been hunting, but there's very little game to be found. We'll have to eat less. But our meals are little now, Patty whimpered. They became less and less as the Donner Party traveled on across another dry stretch, where more oxen slipped from their yokes and fell to the ground. This was Steptoe Valley, leading to the southwest to get around the mountain range where the snow had fallen. Nobody trusted Hastings anymore, and yet their only guide was his wheel tracks, which now turned north. Where is he taking us anyway, the teamsters wanted to know. First he's headed south, now north. He can't find his way across the mountains. This is the two men going ahead. One of them's on a mule and is kind of small, and the other one's a larger man on the horse. He's taking us right back the way we came, John Snyder declared, lashing his oxen to give the statement emphasis. Maybe he is, Milt agreed, but you don't have to take it out on your poor dumb critters. We'll never get to California behind dead oxen. We'll never get there the way we're going. Get along there, you slow-witted brutes. Pull! John lashed them again, cursing them for the troubles of the whole company. When he wasn't swearing at the oxen, he was shouting at Milt, blaming him for the long delay looking for the cattle he had lost. He makes me mad clean through, Milt told the Reeds. Like as not, he'd beat a wife the way he does his oxen. Mary Graves didn't seem to think so. Her younger sisters were sure the two of them were engaged and would be married as soon as they reached California. They were still traveling north through the canyon that soon joined the old California Trail. It was hailed with shouts. No more following Hastings, no more wrong directions, no more piecing together notes picked apart by the birds, no more pampering the oxen, Snyder shouted with a meaning glance towards Milt. From here on in, we've got to make them pull. They had forded Mary's River, as it was then called. The three Marys in the Donner Party giggled over the name, but stopped abruptly when they saw naked Indians peering at them from behind a rock. A few of them, wearing little more than their skins, came into the next camp and made signs which nobody understood. The Indians were probably telling them, "Stop, it's snowing." They were probably saying, "Don't keep going ahead." The Indians appeared to be friendly, but now there were no buffalo steaks to share with them, no mirrors to amuse them, and no palace wagon with its funny little smokestack and double-decker beds. Even their friends, the Donners, were no longer with them. The wagon train had somehow broken up into sections, with the 5 Donner wagons far ahead. Maybe they've caught up with Hastings, remarked Milt Elliott, who was driving the one wagon shared by the Reeds and the Eddies. Mr. Eddy had been kind enough to lend them his ox team. If the Injuns would quit killing our cattle, he remarked, we might catch up. Who wants to catch up? We got troubles enough, said Keseberg, who seemed to have always placed himself in charge of the wagons that were left behind. A horse and 2 oxen belonging to the Graves family were missing, probably killed or stolen by 2 Indians who had pretended friendship. John Snyder declared that he'd make the critters Uncle Billy had left do the work of the other 2. Again, I don't know that the Indians were stealing the horses. I think the horses were just like, get us out of here. Like, their animals are smart. They know, they can tell when things are not going to turn out well. And I think the animals were like, we're out of here. Again, he was warned against overworking the oxen. The poor beasts were half starved, and the wagons were too heavy for them to pull. Whole families were out walking. More and more things were being cached in the hope that someday the emigrants would come back to recover them. But would they? Virginia felt that they were leaving them behind forever. They would be lucky if they got through to California with their lives. Boy, isn't that the truth. Things are getting worse and worse in this bedtime story, this tragic bedtime story. All right, thanks for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about the Donners and the Reeds and this real life story that happened that's such a big part of California history. All right, thanks so much. See you later. Have a good night.